Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Alessandra Mantura, the marketing manager at Nawozyme. And for those of you who do not know us, Nawozyme is a company that develops technology solutions for key maritime certification processes related to ship registry, port clearance, marine pollution, and seafarers training certifications. Today, we are here because Nawozyme is launching Know, our new knowledge series, with the idea to bring to you the latest current issues from the hand of topic experts. In our first session, titled The Philippine Economy Post-Pandemic, we will deep dive on the current situation of the country and the impact that COVID-19 has had on its economy. But why the Philippines? Well, while COVID-19 has reached almost every country in the world, the impact has not been shared equally. Before the pandemic, the Philippines was considered one of the fastest growing emerging markets in the world, but now it will be one of the last East Asian economies to recover. With our key speaker, Professor Bernardo Villegas, we'll go into more detail on the situation of the Philippines. Professor Bernardo Villegas has a PhD in economics from Harvard University, and he is professor at the University of Asia and the Pacific, research director at the Center for Research and Communication in Manila, and visiting professor of IESE Business School in Barcelona. He was part of the core team that framed the 1987 Philippines Constitution, and for over 4 decades, he has been an advisor of the Philippines presidents. So there is no one better than him to give this keynote. So now we welcome you, Professor Villegas. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Elisenda. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm glad to be able to have this conversation about what's happening to the Philippine economy now and after the pandemic. First, the bad news. As Elisenda already mentioned, will be the slowest to recover in East Asia. In fact, I do not agree with even ADB and other international organizations trying to be optimistic, saying we can grow at 6%. Well, ADB said 4.5%, but others 6% or more. Our government is saying 6%. In 2021, the most we can do is going to be at 4%. And the reason is mainly the way we mishandled the pandemic. We had the longest lockdowns, and now we have the slowest rollout in East Asia. Our vaccination rate is only at this moment at 3.4% of the population. And so we are paying the price of a very slow recovery. That's the bad news. The good news is that after the pandemic is put under reasonable control, let's say by the first semester of 2023, so I'm being very conservative, the Philippine economy has very strong fundamentals which were shown in the 5 to 8 years before the pandemic. We were growing at the fastest rate among emerging markets of 6 to 7%. And the fundamentals behind that high growth rate are still present. They have not been in any way erased by the pandemic. And that's where I would like to begin. And I am not citing self-serving information from Philippine organizations or public or private. I'm going to cite international think tanks, banks that had very complimentary data of the Philippine economy before the pandemic. And when I analyze why these international organizations were bullish about the Philippines over the long term, I found out at least 3 fundamentals. The first one I will call our geographic dividend. The second I will call our demographic dividend. And the third one is a temporal dividend. All of these have not in any way been destroyed by the pandemic, as I will demonstrate. Please, the first slide. So this is what I refer to as a geographic dividend. We are right back in the epicenter of the most dynamic region in the world, at least for the next 10 years or more. And I just want to remind you about the American century, which is the 20th century, when America, the United States, was clearly on top of the world politically, economically, militarily. From time to time challenged by the EU and Japan, but remained on top. In fact, when I was in the United States in the 1960s, there were all types of books and articles saying Japan #1. It never happened because of the Japanese committing demographic suicide. The biggest problem now in Japan is the very rapid aging, and they never were able to really continue their rapid growth in the last century. Now, this century, as I'm sure you all know, is called the Asian century. Also, a trilateral competition among three major territories: China, India, and the ASEAN Economic Community. Now, if you take a look at the lower table, just because of the pandemic, the American century countries were struggling to grow at anywhere from 0.8% in Japan to 1.8% in Eurozone and 2.9% in the US. There's no reason to believe that after the normalization of growth after the pandemic, that these countries can grow much faster than these figures. They're already with very high per capita income, and especially for the Eurozone and Japan, they're all suffering from rapid aging. And take a look at the growth rates that the Asian century countries were enjoying before the pandemic. 5.2 for the ASEAN 5, and the Philippines was above average. We were growing at 6 or 7%. India at 7.1%, and China at 6.6%. And I think these types of growth can either be maintained or even improved, especially in the case of the Philippines, after we put the pandemic under reasonable control. So we are in the middle of a region that has not fallen into the protectionist mindset of America First, Brexit, with the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. We are open to trade with one another. And so that is an advantage that the Philippines will be benefiting from. Second, please, the next slides. Now, I just wanted to show you what more than 15 years ago, Goldman Sachs coined BRIC. I'm sure that still is something in your memory. Unfortunately for Brazil and Russia, somewhere along the way, they mismanaged their economies, and no one is excited about Brazil and Russia anymore today, especially Brazil. India and China definitely remain, but you now add the ASEAN 5, and you can add the other 5 to have the ASEAN Economic Community. Now, you will remember that more than 10 years ago, the BRIC leaders, for political correctness, added South Africa. But if you take a look at the figures, really South Africa doesn't really belong to the group, and especially now with all the political challenges that they're facing. And I just wanted to show you that populations are very important in the fundamentals I'm referring to. And that is what I call the demographic dividend. The Philippines is still a young, growing, and we always add English-speaking population because of the two major sectors that our speaking English have made possible. These are two sectors that account for anywhere from 12 to 15% of our GDP. The first one, which of course includes the seafarers, would refer to our overseas workers that earn $32 billion, representing 10 to 11% of our GDP. We wouldn't have this $10 million or more workers abroad if we did not have a young population. And the second benefit from a young population is our BPO IT sector that earns about $25 billion, representing anywhere from 6 to 8% of our GDP. These two actually have been hardly affected by the pandemic. In fact, last year, when the GDP of the Philippines dropped by 9.6%, remittances from overseas workers dropped only by 0.8%. And in the first 4 to 5 months of this year, overseas remittances are already increasing at anywhere from 2 to 5%. Despite the fact that about 500,000 of them had to come back, and you know very well the challenges facing our seafarers, but the remittances have come. And in fact, as the whole world recovers, Filipinos will be in greater demand because they are specially wanted in the health services, caregiving, and other areas where the Filipino has advantage because of his or her soft skills. Next, please. I just wanted to include what the Goldman Sachs economist added to BRIC when he identified those 4 countries as the most promising emerging markets. He added the next 11, and just wanted to show you that the Philippines is part of the next 11. Again, you can see that the common denominator is a large population, South Korea being the smallest. And these countries continue to be very attractive emerging markets in the post-pandemic era. Next, please. Just before the pandemic hit the world, November 2019, this prestigious Oxford Economics Institute presented 10 leading emerging markets that will dominate the global economy in the next decade. Surprise, surprise, the Philippines is number 2, surpassing Indonesia and China. And here again, I know that the reason why, despite all of our flaws, definitely the world knows we have a very imperfect political leadership. I don't want to elaborate, but I'm sure you read about the kind of style our president has. So, despite all of these difficulties, in November 2019, we were still considered the second most promising emerging market that will dominate the global economy in the next decade, thanks to those fundamentals I am enumerating. China is only number 4 here because, as you very well know, despite the fact that China is the one that is leading the recovery now, China will definitely face the problem of aging. China cannot continue to grow as they're growing now because they're aging so fast. Can you imagine a population of 1.4 million, for example, where 30% of the population are over 60 in the next 10 to 20 years? That's the reason why people do not have confidence in the long-term future of China. Next, please. The Center for Economic and Business Research, also based in London, made a projection to 2035, sorry. And in their projection, the Philippines had one of the greatest improvements in rank, from 32 in 2020 to 22 in 2035. I repeat, these are judgments issued by independent think tanks that have nothing to do with Philippine propaganda. Next, please. Again, the Economist presented selected emerging economies ranked on 4 measures of financial strength. This is already at the height of the pandemic. And the Philippines ranked number 6, ahead of Thailand, Saudi Arabia, China, Vietnam, Indonesia. And the main reason for our ranking high is the fact that over the last 20 years, since the EDSA revolution, when we overthrew the dictatorship of Marcos, some of the best minds, the best professionals in economics and finance have been building institutions that make the management of the monetary and fiscal sector independent of political leadership. The signs are we have one of the best central banking systems in Southeast Asia. International organizations have ranked our central bank as one of the best. Our fiscal managers have kept our debt to GDP ratio at the very reasonable 30 to 40% for more than 8 years. And that is why now that we have to borrow a lot because of the pandemic, we can afford to actually increase the debt to GDP ratio to 50% because we have been very disciplined in fiscal management. I'm sure you know that countries like Japan, the US, Spain, Italy have debt to GDP ratios of 100, 150%, just for comparison. And that is a very important human asset that we have, a pool of very competent monetary and fiscal managers that also will help us sustain the fiscal responsibility and monetary stability, whoever is going to be the next president. Next, please. Of course, the longest forecast that was made by Hong Kong Shanghai Bank all the way up to 2050. Again, this was done when we were still more or less known as the sick man of Asia. And if this long-term projection gave the Philippines an advantage over Indonesia, Australia, Argentina, and so on and so forth, again, they were considering this long-term fundamentals I am citing. We increased our ranking by 27 positions, and this is the ranking of the largest GDPs in the world by 2050. Next, please. Just before the pandemic, the Japan Credit Rating Agency upgraded the Philippines from a BBB plus to an A minus. Now we're back to BBB plus because of all the borrowings that the government has been forced to engage in. But as I said, I don't worry because I see that we have a pool of very competent fiscal and monetary managers who can definitely be chosen by the next political leader to continue what their predecessors have done over at least the last 10 years. Next, please. So these are the fundamentals. Just to summarize, demographic dividend, young, growing, English-speaking population. Geographic dividend, we are the best epicenter of the most dynamic economic region in the world. I will now refer to it as the Indo-Pacific region because we cannot ignore India. The temporal dividend, we are graduating in the next 2 to 3 years. We would have done it this year were it not for the pandemic. But in the next 2 to 3 years, we're graduating from what is known as a low middle income economy to an upper middle income economy because we are going to surpass the $4,000 threshold to be an upper middle income economy. And from Engel's law, once a country transitions from low middle income to high or upper middle income, there is little explosion of demand for all types of industrial goods and services. And we are lucky that we are transitioning at this very moment from low, middle to upper middle income. And that is definitely an advantage we have. Then we have abundant natural resources, mining, especially now, which is so much in demand. And by 2023, when we foresee some improvement in international tourism, we will be definitely one of the major destinations, because you probably have heard that an international magazine for tourism and travel ranked one of our islands, Palawan, as the best island resort in the world, better than Bali and Hawaii. And we have hundreds of them among our 7,000 islands. Now, a major contribution of this government is really to increase our spending on infrastructure from the measly 2% that we've had for years to 5 to 6% now. The Build program is a reality. If you visit the Philippines, you will see infrastructures really being built all over the archipelago. And the good thing is they're being built not in the urban centers like Manila, they're being built in the countryside, which really has been our major challenge. We have very poor agricultural productivity because we did not endow our agriculture sector with farm-to-market roads, irrigation systems, and all infrastructures that they need, small farmers need to be productive. Now we're changing that. And I foresee at least the next 2 administrations not only continuing, but intensifying the build and a lot of the infrastructure, fortunately, are being done with the use of the public partnership, investing in group and so on and so forth. And one very promising development is that the regions outside of Metro Manila are growing faster than Manila. There are at least 3 regions that will replace Manila as industrial centers. One is the south of Manila, it's called Calabar Zone, especially the province of Batangas. Another one is in central Luzon, which has Subic and Clark, former US bases, as part of a rapid urbanization development program. In the Visayas, Iloilo is also attracting a lot of infrastructure as well as real estate development. And in Mindanao, the leading city is the city from where our president these are now growing faster than Metro. Fortunate trend. Next, please. Next slide, please. So we have problems. I don't want to give you the impression that it's a bed of roses. No, please go back to the challenges. We have our Achilles heel is our very low agricultural activity. We really stick like a sore thumb in Southeast Asia compared to Thailand, Malaysia, now Vietnam. And that's one thing that is the challenge to the next administration. Fortunately, now we have a very good Secretary of Agricultural Productivity, improving the ease of doing business. That still is a problem that I hear from foreign investors. We have very low quality of basic education. Our students rank very low in international tests. We have to invest more in education. The paradox is that despite all of our young people, we have a shortage of technical skills, especially in construction. And this is a psychosociological problem. We have an influence by the United States in having all of our young people always aiming for a college diploma. They look down on blue-collar work. That's something that some of us in education are trying to address, making sure that more and more of our young people take technical courses, not in universities, but in technical and vocational schools. We still have high rates of electricity, although practically all of the conglomerates are investing heavily in power plants. That's a good news. The bad news is most of them are still coal powered. So that's being addressed by our Department of Energy. We have a lot of corruption, poor governance. It was part of the mismanagement of the health sector. Money that should have gone to vaccination and so on and so forth has not gone to the improvement of health. I am only consoled by the fact that there are first world countries like South Korea, even Malaysia, that have not eradicated corruption. And so I'm consoled by the fact that as long as we have the right economic policies, of course, we have to fight corruption with all our might. But even if we do not succeed immediately, we can still attain at least high middle income category in the next 10 to 15 years. We have challenged in this part of the world, so we just have to be ready. Here, I just want to show you how in 2020 we were surpassed by Vietnam. In 2019, we were still ahead of Vietnam in per capita income. In 2020, Vietnam surpassed us. And here, the main reason is the superb way in which Vietnam has helped its agricultural sector to develop. The state has been very proactive in helping their farmers to be more productive. In fact, one of the success stories is 10 years ago, Vietnam was not a player in the coffee industry. Thanks to the right policies of the government, especially building farm-to-market roads and other facilities in the countryside, Vietnam is now the #1 exporter of coffee in the world, surpassing Brazil. And that is one thing that we use as a model. I will stop here, and I'm sure I've said enough to encourage some of you to ask questions or make comments. So, Elisenda, that's the end of my briefing.
Thank you very much, Professor Bernardo. I was looking at the clock because really our no series, it has a shorter format, so we will just have time for a couple of questions. Yes. But Professor Villegas has offered to share the slides with all of you. And maybe we can also share with you, Professor Villegas, the questions that we may not have time to answer. So we can give them after the webinar a proper answer. So my first question is, well, you are right now in Manila.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, what is the feeling there? Because COVID-19 has been very hard on all of us, and we are working to recover. So is the population optimistic about this recovery?
As I said, not very optimistic. In fact, we are bracing for the Delta virus to hit us in the next 3 to 5 months, because our vaccination rate is going too slowly. And as I said, some of the resources that should be going to fighting it are affected by mismanagement or corruption. We're not very optimistic about our ability, at least in the next 6 to 12 months, to control the pandemic. And that is why, as I said, our GDP cannot possibly increase at 6% this year. So that's the bad news. We are not managing the pandemic properly.
So where should the Philippine government put its efforts to recover in the short term? What should be?
Well, yes. Well, sooner or later, I'm sure, despite the slow process, we will reach herd immunity. And herd immunity, I foresee, will happen in the second half of 2022. And so that's the time that we can now begin to think of 6 to 8%. As long as we have not reached herd immunity, we will have many more lockdowns. And lockdowns always affect the economy. That's the reason why I have a 4% growth projection for this year.
Well, thank you. There are coming questions from the audience, but we are running out of time, so we'll need to leave it here. So thank you very much, Professor Villegas,
Thank you.
for
Thank
being
you,
with
yes.
us today and for your
you.
insightful overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
And for the audience, thank you for connecting with us today. I know that we had some connectivity issues, but I hope that you all have been able to follow the conversation. And I hope that you also enjoyed this session as much as we did. And also, before we sign off, let me remind you that this Friday 23rd, we have our second session on the No Knowledge series with Professor Giulio Toscani on the topic, the current status of artificial intelligence, the progress and challenges in 2021. So a very actual topic also. So don't forget to register now for the session and also to follow us on our LinkedIn page so you don't miss any of our updates. We hope to see you again on Friday, and thank you very much for connecting with us today. Thank you.